Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Friday, September the 26th. And welcome to our commentary. I've got a post over at the American Thinker today. I'm going to ask you to check it out. And it's about what's happening down in Mexico in the state of Sinaloa. For those of you who may not know where Sinaloa is, well, it's in the Pacific coast. And it's well known for one very popular tourist attraction, and that's Mazatlan, a very popular destination for American tourists over the years, over there by the beach in Mazatlan. Very pretty state, actually. A lot of culture. It's just a beautiful state, the state of Sinaloa. But unfortunately, right now, the state of Sinaloa is caught up in a huge violent wave. And what's happening is that you've got two cartels at war with each other. That's what it's all about. You've got one cartel that is run by the sons of El Chapo, and then you've got another one that is trying to take them out. So you've got these two cartels trying to take each other out and basically grab control of the territory. That's what they're fighting for. And of course, in the middle of all of this are the people of Mexico, the people who live there, the people who live in cities in Sinaloa. And they are, well, they're dealing with a lot of crime. Now, most of the killing, of course, is cartels killing each other. But you still have a lot of innocent people being killed. And the biggest impact of this violence is the impact that it has on businesses. Because, I mean, these shootouts can happen anywhere. So a lot of businesses have closed. A lot of people have moved out of the state to a different area. And it has also created quite a political problem for the political class in Mexico, because on one hand, they're saying, well, everything's fine. But of course, it's not fine, because people are seeing the people being shot and killed every day. They've lost 48 police officers in the last 2 years in Sinaloa, just to give you an idea of how deadly the killing and the shooting has been. So it's a horrible thing going on down there. And I'm not sure it's going to get any better, to be honest with you, because ever since we closed the border, ever since we made it more difficult for these cartels to come in with their inventories of whatever, it means now that they're fighting with each other for territory or for these routes. And so it's going to get very ugly down there. And the Mexican political class is under a lot of pressure to show some resolution to this violence. And it's not working out very well either for that. You know, the situation in Sinaloa, for those of you who want to have some idea, is sort of like in Chicago, you know, where you've got the governor of Chicago saying, everything's fine. Everything's fine. I mean, look, this is all Trump trying to create a reason to bring in federal troops. But in fact, everything is not fine. You got 5 people killed this weekend, 5 people killed the next weekend. Well, sort of something like that is happening in Sinaloa, where the federal government in Mexico is trying to somehow ignore the problem, and they cannot get away with it because the problem is so huge. So Sinaloa, right there in the Pacific, and the beautiful city of Mazatlan, many Americans over the years have gone to Mazatlan for the beach. I was thinking of whether Mazatlan was the place where that movie was filmed. Remember that movie by Bo Derek called 10, where she was this beautiful woman walking on the beach and there was a man who was obsessed with her? I don't know if it was in Mazatlan where that film was made, but that's, you know, the beauty of the Mazatlan beaches are stunning. And as I say, many Americans over the years have gone there for vacation and for long weekends or whatever. And it's just a beautiful place, but unfortunately, there's a little bit too much violence going on down there. What a tragedy that something like that would be going on. I have a post coming out tomorrow talking about the dilemma that the Democrats are facing. Washington Post came out with a brand new poll asking people not so much do you approve or disapprove, but looking at issues. And I always think that's a more effective poll because you're taking the personalities out of the picture and you're basically talking on the issues. And on the issue of crime, on the issue of immigration, and on the issue of the economy, the Republicans are winning all three. I mean, crime is like by 20 points. It's not even close. The economy is like 7 points. Immigration, somewhere in that range also. And you have to ask yourself, why is this happening? Why are the Republicans so far ahead when it comes to crime? Well, you can see it in Chicago. You can see it in some of these cities. I mean, the crime in these cities is pretty bad. And some of the local politicians, rather than confronting the problem, well, they start making excuses. Well, it's not really happening, or, whatever the reason may be. So you can understand why it impacts politically. Now, I still think that the election of 2026 is going to be based more on the economy than anything else. So if Trump can somehow keep that going, and by the way, the latest GDP figures were like 3.8, which is a good figure, a very good figure for the United States. But I still think it's going to be the economy. And of course, the economy presents challenges. The inflation is still high. If not high in terms of numbers, things are still expensive, which is what a lot of people are complaining about. So I still think the economy will be the biggest challenge in 2026. But at least according to this poll that just came out in the Washington Post, the Republicans are winning that. More people are willing to give the Republicans better grades when it comes to the economy. Now, this shutdown that is about to happen, it looks like it's going to happen. I don't think that's going to help the Democrats either. Because the reasons that they are choosing to shut down the government are so silly. They want money for NPR. They want more healthcare money, I guess, for who? Who needs more? Illegal aliens? Is that what I understand? So, those are not solid grounds to shut down the government, at least politically. So I'm not saying it's going to be home free for President Trump either, because when you shut down the government, somebody usually pays the price. And in this case, it could be both. But I think the Democrats are going to pay a bigger price because of why they are forcing the government shutdown. I think it's more to please this segment of the party that wants fights with Trump at any cost. And I think that's the segment that will eventually hurt the Democrats. So probably there's going to be a shutdown. That's my guess. But what I'm seeing is, at least in this Washington Post poll, and I've seen others that are similar, is that when you look at issues, the Republicans are doing pretty good with respect to issues. So we'll see. We'll see how all of that develops. Well, you may have heard that former FBI Director Jim Comey was indicted in Virginia. We'll have to see what happens. I personally have always been of the opinion that people are innocent until proven guilty. So let's give Mr. Comey an opportunity to defend himself. The basic accusation is that he lied to Congress, which has to do with an appearance that he made in Congress, I think back in 17 or 18. And there was a question from Senator Cruz, and he answered that question or denied the issue anyway. I think it's pretty clear that somebody was misleading Congress, whether it was Comey or his assistant, Cade. Somebody was not telling the truth. They both cannot be telling the truth. So we'll see how it goes. Now, my surprise is that they didn't go after Director Comey or former Director Comey over the Hillary Clinton issue, because I think, to me, that's the biggest thing. The way that Hillary Clinton was protected back in 2016 over those documents, to me, that's the biggest thing. Now, maybe the statute of limitations has kicked in. I don't know. But that, to me, is what I like to see somebody held accountable for. How they basically protected Hillary Clinton and gave her a pass on what was obvious violations of procedures. So that, to me, is the biggest thing. And why they're not going after him over that, again, maybe it's a statute of limitations, or maybe they're going to get to that through this indictment. I don't know. We'll have to see. But in the meantime, there's going to be a trial, and I'm sure it'll get a lot of attention, this particular trial. And Jim Comey indicted. That's a pretty big story. Former director of the FBI. That's a pretty big story. Well, a little bit on this day in history. I'm going to take you back to 1960, September 26, 1960. And there was a presidential election going on, in case you forgot. Senator John Kennedy was running against Vice President Richard Nixon. Very close election at the moment. All the polling data had it as a very close election. and they had their first debate. This was the first televised debate of a presidential election on this day in 1960. You know, when I was in school, we actually went back and watched those debates. And I was always so impressed with the quality, first of all, the professionalism of the reporters. That was really something to watch. They were so elegant, so good. The questions were great. And the two candidates were absolutely great. Now, on television, at least that night, President or former president or future President Kennedy, Senator John F. Kennedy, looked much better. The appearance of Senator Kennedy was a lot better. Vice President Nixon, I understand, was sick and had been down for a couple of days, was something, and he looked a little pale, no question about it. And many people say that was a factor why so many think that John Kennedy won the debate. But what's interesting is they've done some surveys of this and some analysis of this. The people who saw the debate in person, there were 3 debates, the people who saw the debates in person thought that Kennedy had won. But the people who heard it on the radio, and back in 1960, there were still many Americans, particularly in some of the rural areas, who didn't have television, and they heard it on the radio. And the people who heard it on the radio thought that Nixon had won, because Nixon was able to command maybe more information or whatever the reason. Of course, eventually Kennedy won, and one of the closest elections in American history, extremely close election in every sense, the popular vote, the electoral college, everything. But this debate, I would really encourage you to go back sometimes and just check it out. It's available on YouTube. When I saw the debate, it was in our school. The teacher, I guess, showed it to us as part of the class, and I thought it was great. And we've had some good debates after that, of course, but that was the first one. That was the first on TV. And you see these 2 men there, these 2 men who would cross their paths. Obviously, would cross. Nixon would come back in 1968 to win. John Kennedy, of course, was killed in 1963. But when you watch that debate, here's one word that you're not going to hear. Just think about this. Vietnam. The biggest issue of the 1960s ended up being Vietnam, right? I mean, you could argue that it brought down the LBJ administration. That issue was not even mentioned in the debate. There wasn't a single discussion about Vietnam in that debate. Of course, Vietnam became a huge issue 3 or 4 years later. But you think about that debate, and these 2 men were talking about the future. They spoke about Cuba. They spoke about the Soviet Union. They spoke about China. They spoke about a lot of things. But Vietnam was not discussed. And that was the biggest issue of the 1960s. So it's interesting. It's a little bit reminiscent of the 2000 debate between former Vice President Al Gore and Governor Bush of Texas. When they had debates, they talked about foreign policy, but nobody mentioned Iraq. And there was very little talk of Afghanistan. And yet those were the big issues a few years later. So stuff like that happens. Stuff like that happens in these debates where, we don't talk about things, but it also emphasizes how the surprises that are there in the future. Vietnam, of course, for that generation, and then, of course, Iraq and Afghanistan for President Bush. Thank you for listening. Everybody have a great day this weekend, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye, everybody.